We're very excited to have this event here and welcome Cedar. This is really what the engine shed was intended to facilitate. The whole principle of the engine shed is to try and inform our future by looking to our past. And I think as we look to facilitate a just transition for the built environment, having these discussions is really important. So welcome and good luck.
Madin Va, good morning. My name's Tom. We were trying to connect with as diverse a group of stakeholders as we could reach through our network of networks. And in those conversations, you know, I was asking people how they felt about the just transition, and what people told us, what you told us, was pretty consistent. You said, look, we understand the problems, we know most of the solutions, we're bored with being consulted, and we're really frustrated about the slow pace of delivery. Our sector is super siloed. There's loads of people doing really fantastic stuff out there, delivering the transition, but they're just not well connected to each other. Too often people are repeating what's been done before and working in parallel with others without knowing it. And for delivery, that's just not efficient. The just transition in construction and the built environment is a team sport.
Just transition means that in transitioning to a zero carbon economy, people and communities are not negatively impacted by that. So people who are already in poverty, and there's a lot, that situation should not be exacerbated. But it should also mean that the industries that are currently successful, that are carbon intensive, the people who are employed in that should not find themselves in the position that people were post the coal industry.
I think one of the most important things in delivering the just transition is collaboration. It's not going to be just one thing. It's not going to be just finance or just policy or just health benefits. It's going to be making sure that there's a real interconnection between all of those aspects.
How do we get from the present to a net zero future and bring everyone with us?
Building resilient places that support well-being, that support the natural environment, that encourage community cohesion, that support local economies. I think these are all really important things that we need to be centering in our placemaking.
Fast-paced, day-to-day, million Teams notifications, million emails. Very few of us have the luxury of being able to sit and think strategically, you know, what is the future that we want?
We're facing an existential crisis, and that's really scary, and the position that leaves a lot of people in, myself included, is paralysis, and you don't do anything because you can't, it's too overwhelming. So I think holding on to that hope is really, really important, and the risk is losing that.
Tom's asked me to do perhaps what you might call the long view. The intensity of carbon in how we live and also what we build with has increased to a degree that is way beyond what anyone would perhaps recognise from not that long ago. This is a building quite close to where I live, a turf gable, possibly clay bonded masonry for the lower part and a version of thatch. That building now looks like this. So in terms of the circular dust to dust, ashes to ashes, which is our own fate, so in the same token this building did that journey. There's stuff here that's gone away to the soil from which it came. The materials that are going into this are probably quite high embodied carbon. The bricks, colliery bricks, made as a side process of the oil shale industry in Scotland, cast iron roans down pipes, concrete, cement, and everything. So that is quite probably, in terms of carbon, reasonably heavy, but it's still with us. The carbon is now done. Knocking it down and building a lower operational carbon model, I don't think is the answer.
I think the emphasis is on making better use of existing assets. I mean, that's the direction to travel.
How much do you see this shift, this refocusing on retrofit and refurbishment coming in rather than new build, or is new build still?
People still want a new build, but we've seen, I mean, we work nationally, not just in Scotland, so we're sort of seeing the new build work in city centre London sort of drying up now, and a lot of that's retrofit, and that'll sweep north, you know, but people do want a nice shiny building, I suppose. But
there's no better way to save carbon than use what's already there, is there, you know, and refitting it.
The replacement rate in Scotland of buildings is less than 1.5% per year.
So most of the buildings that are going to have to cope with this scary future climate are already here. We don't know what the future's going to be, so we have to go for solutions which respond to the widest range of possible futures. Don't try and pick a winner. We have to think about flexible solutions which can be adapted and upscaled as time progresses and as we see triggers of change.
We are all generally aware that a move to a just transition has so many positive benefits, not just for us in the immediate term, but in the longer term for our children, our grandchildren, future generations. How do we get that awareness raising out? How do we raise that awareness to others so that they see this as a good thing?
Having worked with a number of communities on how to inform this behavior, you can't change behavior that easily. If we were to be able to change climate change attitudes and behavior, we would have solved a generational problem in one go.
A lot of people live in boxes and they don't want to look outside of it, but that is the barrier. And also a lot of my friends who are now retired, they've got the money, don't want to know anything else. They say, I've done my bit, I don't want to be involved anymore.
Tell people what to do, they immediately come back and say no. But also we're in this huge epidemic of misinformation. So the minute we try and put out basic things on social media, they're hit back constantly with don't believe in climate change, COVID was made up, fix the potholes instead. So how do you foster that change without telling people what to do, but when you are sharing information they're not wanting to engage with it?
Do we use awareness raising to make it socially unacceptable to do stuff that is clearly detrimental to our future and other people's future? Is it all right to do that?
I think you have to look at kind of positive examples of instances where there has been that behaviour change. So I suppose smoking cessation is probably a really good one and encapsulates lots of different elements. So you've got kind of higher taxation or cost on cigarettes. There's concern around one's health, and then there's technology, so vapes coming in. So that's a whole kind of system there working together to reduce smoking, and for all intents and purposes it's worked, and it's worked really well. That's in my opinion, the model that we should be using for kind of just transition, decarbonisation, reaching net zero.
The whole way we do stuff needs to be reconsidered, but we haven't got time. We haven't got 30 years, 25 years to make those changes, and that's what an emergency is. When you've got an emergency, take drastic action.
You know, it's often said that the first photographs of planet Earth taken from the moon, the so-called Earthrise photo, that's what kickstarted the environmental movement in the late 60s and 70s. But in many ways, I find this image much more compelling. It was taken by the Cassini spacecraft as it was passing Jupiter. It turned around and took this photograph of planet Earth, and you can see that we're just this kind of pale blue dot isolated in space. And I think it's clear from this that no one is coming to our rescue. Whatever happens is up to us. And currently there are a lot of powerful people who'd like you to believe that technology has all the answers. I don't believe that's the case. I think technology has some of the answers, but we actually need broader cultural change. We need to leap right now to the next stage of our evolution. Our built environment is to a large extent a reflection of the way we see ourselves as humans. So if we take the view promoted by neoliberal economics that humans are basically selfish, savage individuals in a zero-sum game of survival of the fittest, then it leads to urban forms like this, very isolated buildings with very low levels of social cohesion. If, on the other hand, we took a more enlightened view of human nature, then I think it would lead to examples like the 15-minute city, modeling them on ecosystems. And what I mean by that is considering each element of that city as the equivalent of a species, and getting the resource flows to interconnect so that the waste from one part of that system becomes the input for something else in that system.
The whole thing about placemaking and bringing people into that, into the towns to experience something and spend their money there rather than Amazon and get stuff delivered and just click buy. Because I think, you know, that's one of the things that our town centres are kind of struggling with, because they're at a disadvantage.
We can also learn from the way that nature assembles materials. So if you look at these shells under a powerful microscope, you can see that they're made out of these layers of calcium carbonate discs connected together with a flexible protein. And that gives it amazing resistance to cracking. At a chemical level, it's almost identical to ordinary blackboard chalk, but because of this microstructure, it achieves 3,000 times the
toughness.
For the last 4 billion years, climate and nature have co-evolved as a coupled system, and they're not going to stop doing that anytime soon.
In my office, we designed a house based on this idea, so creating a curved form to create a stiff shape, and then using layers of tiles very similar to the abalone. And in relative scale terms, this is thinner than eggshells. This could be built with a fraction of the amount of material of a conventional house.
The interactions between climate and nature are, profoundly important in terms of how we understand and then how we address a climate-nature emergency. Life in soils actually regulate important parts of the climate system. For construction, a lot of the time, soils are just something that you wipe away to flatten a surface to then build on, as opposed to working with the grain of nature and and thinking about the processes that are going on under our buildings.
We could be the first generation to witness the great return of flora and fauna to our forests, the return of salmon runs to our rivers, the return of wildlife to the deserts, and a rewilding of the human spirit. All of that is possible, and to see our role as co-enablers of the flourishing of all life for all time.
Do you think there are strong enough business cases that have been presented just now to alter business models and capital flows so that we can accelerate this transition?
I think it's essential that we try to shift mindsets in our teams and with our clients right at the early stages. And there's an exercise that I've done with a number of clients that encourages people to connect with generations going backwards and generations going forward, and to expand your thinking to a sort of 200-year perspective. And I think there are very few people that would choose to have a degenerative legacy. So if you can combine an exercise like that with an explanation of the difference between sustainable and regenerative, I have found it's extremely useful at getting people on board with a more ambitious way of thinking.
AI and all the hype surrounding AI, do you see that technology really helping to drive the way forward?
I think there are some AI tools that could really help us, what's sometimes referred to as genetic algorithms. So, for instance, if you've got a really complicated site, you really want to give everyone on that site a decent living space with a certain amount of natural light, a certain amount of sunlight. And that's actually a really complicated puzzle to solve. But it's the kind of thing that genetic algorithms can do very effectively. You can explore about 1 million different permutations in just a few days.
The talk we heard today about regenerational stuff, that's very inspiring. It's amazing. It's a thing that we all want. When you actually put that to a plate up to leadership or to the decision makers, that isn't necessarily seen like as a desirable thing, because the desirable thing's like, okay, well, politically, what will win me an election? I think that's maybe the broader issue on climate change and perhaps just transition, is that these are long-term visions and we work in a cycle of 5-year periods.
Sometimes we talk in terms that people can't see how it applies to whether it's their little organisations or themselves.
It's almost like we're short-circuiting progress because we're not breaking it down into bite-sized chunks.
What we don't have a great data vocabulary for at the moment is how we translate lots of technical stuff that sit in data analyst inboxes and engineers spreadsheets, how we translate that to help your arts background policy decision maker make really informed decisions. With all of this brilliant data science we have, how do we embed that in tools that are accessible and easy to use?
Putting it in sort of simple terms of things, we actually I've got a pile of children's books, and that's what I use to actually go in and go into communities. I use the language from children's books, which is very simple ways of explaining lay terms. The difference between climate and weather, for example, is actually a concept that nobody really understands. But when you do explain it, people get it very quickly.
Most important thing for me in the just transition is not, as we've been talking about, is not your air tightness, your insulation, your skills, but it's how we work with the public, the people of Scotland. That's where the real crux of the issue is, Big believer in social sustainability, big believer in the best building we can have, or the best community we can have is the one that people love and use. But we need to be able to talk to people in a manner that everybody understands, that has respect and has trust.
I think we're trying to be too sophisticated, too technological. All of these technological solutions fall down when they meet human beings. You know, it's the user interface which seems to be the problem. And I think then there needs to be some very focused sort of empirical testing of things. Like the BRE used to have their BRE house where they tested, you know, different ways of building a house for sustainability, but perhaps they didn't have a family live in that house for 2 weeks and see how these things actually worked in practice. So it's that sort of level of very specific, proper real world testing of things.
The only way that we're going to be able to do what we want to do is to make lives better for people. Like, we need to give them heat and hot water, and that's not what's happening just now.
If we now go in and try and participate with the community, they are so fatigued, they're just not interested in speaking to us. So somehow we have to get things back to a level of communication which is very simple. So the ideas you're showing, I think they're fantastic. They're so visionary. I'm another architect. I totally appreciate them. But how do we actually start getting that message across to the general public? Working within the peripheral estates in Glasgow, they're not going to listen to us. So if you have any kind of hints about how we might actually start to take some of these ideas to a level that people will understand.
The former mayor of Bristol, George Ferguson, had a good way of capturing this where he said consultation without inspiration is hopeless, and it's really important to involve inspiration in any kind of consultation process so that people get a sense of what is possible, and that's an essential part of raising the level of ambition. I'd still acknowledge that it is a difficult task, and I'm not suggesting for a moment that it is easy, and I think that is a very worrying issue. I can remember as a teenager, the future was always something that was sold to us as something that would be inevitably better and better. And I think sometime around sort of late 90s, we lost that. And so I hope that by practicing more unifying ways of communicating with each other, we might be able to restore that faith in the possibility of a positive future.
I think we need to look at our current state, where we are, our future state, where we want to or need to be, and then that informs the action state. How are we going to get there? But it needs to be including everybody in that. So a just transition is inclusive, it's accessible, and we need to hear different voices. If we can map the landscape we're trying to cross, then by doing that, we can create more visibility of that landscape and who the stakeholders and actors are within that ecosystem in Scotland here in the built environment, so that we can better connect for collaboration and for coordinated action.
We're just going to invite the 5 facilitators to kind of capture all that wisdom you've been sharing, drawing out the key things from the different groups and the conversations that happened.
Starting with some issues that were highlighted was the idea of false narratives and conspiracy theories, which also includes the idea of endless growth and how do you overcome that very compelling way of visualizing the future. It's not just telling stories, but listening to stories. Are we listening well enough? The way we are at the moment, we need to get better at listening.
And governments are rolling back on their commitments. They say they're going to do stuff and then they don't do it, or they'll make an excuse for not doing it. And as we try to move towards a just transition, there's going to be a real risk of the public just not trusting what they're being told.
The planetary emergency should probably be an apolitical issue that people are able to rally around.
People aren't hearing about the things that are being done at that low grassroots level. And actually those are the projects that inspire us. But we don't have these networks in place. And we don't see ourselves as part of nature. That's another risk. This is all an external thing. We're doing the just transition, not for us as humans, but for nature. So we need to change that story so that the just transition is something that we're doing for us.
Construction, as we practice it now, does not fear and respect nature, it ignores and it abuses it. And that's a fundamental part of the culture that we need to change. Our culture change is really hard to do, but we've got to do it.